Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly behind the Abbey walls to explore a world most people never saw, unless they were born into it or tried very, very hard to avoid it. You're about to live a day in the sandals of a medieval nun, and, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's gruesome or dangerous, but because it's just that boring. Boring, repetitive, holy, silent, and oddly, kind of comforting? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun does, and let's be honest, it's not a gentle wake-up. There's no feather pillow or soft blanket. You're curled up in a wooden-framed bed, stuffed with straw that pokes through the linen, and you're already cold. Not chilly cold. We're talking the kind of cold where you'd swear the air itself is judging you. The bell rings out across the cloister, hollow and stern. It's time for matins. It's barely 2 or 3 in the morning, and you haven't even dreamt about cheese yet. You roll out of bed, groaning just a little, even though groaning is definitely discouraged. Your robes are scratchy. Your sandals, if you have them, are too big. If not, your bare feet hit the stone floor like a slap from St. Peter himself. You light your little oil lamp, trying not to trip over your neighbor's bed, Sister Agnes, who somehow manages to float like a holy ghost whenever she moves. She doesn't make a sound, and you're starting to suspect she sleeps with her eyes open. Terrifying. You trudge down the long, cold corridor toward the chapel. The walls are damp. There's always some invisible leak that makes everything smell faintly of moss and penitence. The only light is your flickering flame, and it's doing a terrible job of cheering you up. When you reach the chapel, it's just as you left it. Dark, echoing, and somehow serious. Nuns file in one by one, heads bowed, eyes downcast. Nobody speaks. It's like being part of a very sleepy ghost cult, except you're the ghost and nobody brought snacks. You kneel, you chant, you sit, you stand, you chant again. The Latin runs together until it sounds like murmured soup ingredients. Your stomach grumbles, loudly. Someone 2 pews away shoots you a look. Could have been Sister Hildegard. She fasts for fun. Classic Hildegard. Matins runs long, as usual. It always does. You try not to fall asleep during Psalm 119. It's very long and, frankly, not your favorite. You catch yourself. After matins, you don't get to collapse back into bed. That's not the monastic way. No, you go straight into lauds, the next prayer of the divine office. You do this every day, by the way. The same order, same psalms, same foot-cramping wooden pews. Historians still argue whether the entire prayer cycle was truly followed to the letter in every convent, or if the nuns sometimes, just sometimes, took a little nap behind a pillar. You will never know. But you strongly suspect Sister Cecilia has mastered the art of sleeping with her eyes open. Eventually, finally, you're allowed to shuffle back to your cell. You don't call it a room because room implies some kind of luxury or privacy. It's a stone box with a wooden cross, a rough cot, a tiny desk, and a chamber pot that smells like last Thursday. You sit on the edge of your bed and take a moment to breathe. The cold has settled into your bones, and your knees are making that ominous clicking noise again. You stretch your fingers, ink-stained already from yesterday's copying, and remind yourself you chose this life. Or maybe it chose you. You were the 3rd daughter, after all, and 3rd daughters rarely got a dowry. As the gray light of dawn starts to creep in through the high, narrow window, you hear the distant bell ring again. Breakfast soon. You sigh. Your stomach rumbles. Sister Hildegard glares again. Welcome to the Abbey. You're going to need thicker socks. The bell tolls again, slow, heavy, and unmistakably judgy. It's time for prayers. Again. Because if there's one thing a medieval nun has more than lice and lentils, it's liturgical obligations. You rise from your cot with the grace of a half-defrosted squirrel and shuffle into the cloister hall, joining the line of hooded silhouettes moving silently toward the chapel for prime. You're not exactly sleepwalking, but it's close. Your knees pop, your spine creaks, and your mind is already drifting. How many prayers does one have to say before breakfast, you wonder? The answer is too many. In the chapel, candlelight flickers against the stone walls, casting giant, wobbly shadows that make the whole space feel mildly haunted. You know it isn't haunted, technically, but Sister Winifred once swore she saw St. Margaret tapping on the window during a thunderstorm. St. Margaret, it turns out, strongly resembled a startled owl. You find your place on the worn wooden bench. No cushions. That would be indulgent. Besides, suffering is practically a sacrament here. The chant begins, soft and low, like bees reciting poetry underwater. You join in. Latin flows from your lips automatically now, though half the time you don't remember what you're actually saying. You just hope it's not cursing the Pope by accident. Prime, the dawn prayer, is meant to spiritually prepare you for the day's work. Whether that work is washing linens or illuminating manuscripts, you're supposed to do it with grace, humility, and ideally, not a single sarcastic thought. You're already failing. During the responsory, your mind drifts. You imagine what breakfast might be today. Barley bread? Probably. Weak beer? Definitely. Cheese? Unlikely. It's Thursday. You make a mental note to pray harder for cheese. One particularly pious sister is swaying with closed eyes, lost in divine ecstasy, or, more likely, napping vertically. You stifle a yawn because yawning during prayers isn't exactly sinful, but it's frowned upon like whistling or asking too many questions. Historians still argue whether Prime was more about spiritual discipline or simply a way to enforce a tight schedule in an otherwise chaotic medieval world. Either way, it works. Your day is ruled by bells, and the bells do not negotiate. Eventually, the last Amen echoes across the stones, and the nuns rise like weary tulips in wool. You follow the stream of habits down the corridor toward the refectory. You know what's coming. You also know you won't enjoy it. The refectory is a long, echoing room with bare tables, no tablecloths, and absolutely no chatter. You enter in silence, file to your assigned spot, and wait for the signal to sit. When it comes, the benches creak in unison, a choral complaint from 100 aching knees. Food arrives, carried by the novice sisters with the speed of reluctant turtles. You get a chunk of stale barley bread, a thin slice of something that could once have been root vegetable, and a clay mug of watered-down ale. No talking is allowed, of course. Instead, Sister Beatrix stands at the pulpit and begins to read. Something about Saint Agnes refusing to marry a Roman noble. Again. As you chew, slowly and with questionable enthusiasm, you watch the steam rise from your mug and think wistfully of eggs. You haven't had an egg since Pentecost. Even then, it was shared among 5 sisters, and you only got the yolk. You're not bitter. Okay, you're a little bitter. You glance around the table. Sister Agnes is slicing her bread into perfect geometric cubes again. She's like a holy architect, and just as rigid. Sister Joan is pretending not to cry into her soup. You suspect it's because she was assigned to latrine duty again. That's the kind of thing that breaks a woman. In a rare moment of rebellion, you break a tiny corner off your bread and tuck it into your sleeve. Not for snacking. No, that would be sinful. It's for the sparrows that wait by the windowsill after meals. Technically, you're not allowed to feed them. But technically, you also once saw the abbess doing the same thing when she thought no one was looking. After breakfast, there's no rest. Rest is for saints and corpses. You clear your place in silence and follow the others into the next phase of the day. You still haven't spoken a word, and you won't. Not until noon. The morning belongs to God, and apparently He prefers minimal conversation. As you pass the cloister garden on your way to scriptorium duty, you take one deep breath of cold morning air. The sun is up now, pale and struggling, casting long shadows across the stone path. A blackbird chirps from the fig tree near the herb bed. It sounds smug. You look up at the abbey walls, high and endless. You haven't left them in years. And yet, somehow, they still find new ways to make you feel smaller every day. You sigh. Time to copy some psalms. Again. The work bell rings with the same enthusiasm as a funeral dirge. It's time for labor, the productive sort, not the spiritual strain of sitting in silence while pretending to enjoy barley mush. You shuffle into the refectory's back door again, but this time it's not for food. It's for post-breakfast cleanup. Yes, the same place you just finished your silent meal becomes your workplace, and yes, you'll be scrubbing benches with a rag that hasn't known joy or soap in months. Sister Gertrude assigns tasks with all the warmth of a tax ledger. You're on sweeping duty today. Again. You think back longingly to that one glorious week you got to stoke the kitchen fire. It smelled like burnt onions and spilled milk, but at least it was warm. Armed with a whisk broom made from tied-together twigs, you sweep crumbs from under benches while attempting to ignore the sharp little jab of Sister Agnes's judgmental eyes. She always gets dish duty and acts like she's been canonized for it. You wonder what her inner monologue sounds like. Probably Latin. Angry Latin. The sweeping isn't difficult, but it's a chance to think. You recall the last time the bishop visited and brought hard cheese and a bag of almonds. The whole abbey nearly swooned. You didn't get almonds. Sister Cecilia ate yours. She apologized, which was worse somehow. With the floors sufficiently crumb-free, or at least no longer crunchy, you move on to the next silent ritual. the hour of stillness. This is not, as the name suggests, time for a nap or quiet contemplation. It's reading, or, if you're not literate, pretending to read while side-eyeing those who are. Fortunately, you can read. In fact, you're decent at it, which is why Sister Scholastica, who supervises the scriptorium, has taken a keen interest in assigning you to manuscript duty. It sounds grand. It's not. You enter the scriptorium, a long, narrow room where windows are small and drafts are large. Each writing desk is a tiny world, an ink pot, a quill, a wax candle, already melted to a stub, and a manuscript in progress. You sit at your spot and crack your knuckles. This is not technically allowed, but Sister Scholastica is halfway deaf and likely won't hear. The task? Copying the Book of Psalms. Again. You've copied it 3 times now, and you still don't understand why Psalm 137 starts so dramatically and ends in a theological mic drop. As you dip your quill in the ink, you remind yourself. Steady hand, slow strokes, mind focused. And yet your eyes wander. You glance at the margin of your last page and see it. That tiny doodle of a dancing goose you slipped in last week. No one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. Saints preserve you. Hours pass. You copy line after line in looping, elegant script. Your back begins to ache. Your fingers cramp. You're fairly certain you've developed an entirely new form of scoliosis. You flex your hand and keep going. Now here's the thing. Historians still argue whether nuns like you had full access to the rich, colorful artistry of manuscript illumination, or if that was reserved for the monks. Some evidence says yes. Other documents suggest your job is just to do the writing and let someone more qualified read, mail, add the angels, devils, and gleeful rabbits jousting on snails. But every once in a while, you sneak in a small, perfectly shaped golden star just beneath the Amen. Eventually, a bell rings, signaling the midday break. Not lunch. Oh no, that's too modern. This is terse, the 3rd canonical hour. More prayers. Because nothing cleanses cramped wrists like an extra helping of Psalm 23. You trudge out of the scriptorium and into the chapel once more. Sister Scholastica remains behind to guard the manuscripts. You suspect it's less about security and more about catching whoever's been sneaking tiny medieval cats into the margins. Guilty. In the chapel, the scent of old stone and candle wax wraps around you like a wool blanket soaked in frankincense. You kneel. You chant. Again. The rhythm of the words almost lulls you to sleep, but then you catch Sister Hildegard watching you from the corner of her eye. Always watching, always judging. After terse, you're free for a few minutes. You take a brief walk around the cloister garden, pretending to admire the struggling rose bushes while secretly planning how to snag a nap without anyone noticing. You sit on a stone bench, close your eyes, and breathe. The wind rustles the apple trees. A bee bumbles past your nose. Somewhere, a goat sneezes. You smile. Life behind the abbey walls may be strict, silent, and smothered in scripture. But sometimes it's not so bad, especially when nobody's asking you to copy Psalm 119 again. You really hate Psalm 119. You're just beginning to enjoy the garden's rare sunlight, soaked in bird song, a breeze, and the distant clatter of someone accidentally knocking over a pail. When the bell rings. Again. Of course. Because God does not care about your vitamin D levels. This time it's the bell for labor duty, and today you're on garden work. You sigh. The sun was nice while it lasted. You head toward the herb beds in the outer cloister, where Sister Bertilda is already elbow deep in what smells like a scandal between onions and vinegar. Sister Bertilda is ancient. She's not officially the infirmarian, but no one has the heart, or perhaps the authority, to correct her when she insists that a combination of horseradish and goose feathers can cure melancholia. You suspect she's winging it 80% of the time, but she once fixed your cough with honey and pickled turnip, so who are you to argue? Your job today is weeding. You kneel by the thyme patch and begin tugging up chickweed with methodical resentment. The soil is damp. The worms are numerous. One of them wriggles up onto your sandal and stares at you judgmentally as if to say, well, who really belongs here? You try to focus. Pluck, toss, pluck, toss. Occasionally, Sister Bertilda quizzes you. What do you give a nun with a bloated stomach? You reply without looking up. Mint, boiled in ale. And for a wandering womb? You pause. Camphor, saffron, and, let me guess, goose feathers? She cackles like a crow and calls you a bright one. You glow a little. It's the closest thing to praise you've heard in weeks. Between plants, you spot a tiny scrap of parchment someone discarded. It has a rough drawing on it, probably from a novice practicing calligraphy. You tuck it away. You like little things that don't belong. So do the mice in your cell. As you finish up, you move to help carry cut herbs back to the infirmary stores. Lavender for calmness, rosemary for remembrance, sage for, well, for cooking mostly, but no one says that out loud. On the way back, Sister Bertilda tells you about the time she saw a monk faint because he sniffed too much fennel. She swears it happened during a funeral. You laugh quietly. Well, as quietly as possible without drawing divine lightning. Historians still argue whether nunneries had full herbal pharmacies or if they were limited to simple remedies. Some records suggest elaborate gardens with imported plants. Others show basic beds of parsley and thyme. Your abbey falls somewhere in between, modest, but full of enthusiasm and the occasional leech jar. You pass the fish pond. It's small, round, and disturbingly still. Sister Hildegard claims St. Peter once visited it in a dream and blessed the carp. You suspect it's just algae. Back in the cloister corridor, Your hands are muddy, your knees sore, and your veil smells like dill. You're sent to rinse off at the stone basin outside the kitchen. The water is, naturally, freezing. It bites at your fingertips and runs down your sleeves. You mutter a brief prayer for warmer springs. By now, the sun is high. The garden work is over, but there's still a long stretch before the next meal. So, of course, it's time for more scripture. You're sent to read aloud in the library for the older sisters whose eyes aren't what they used to be. Some say this is a great honor. You suspect it's more like unpaid voice work. The library smells like dust, wax, and hope. The old wooden shelves sag slightly under the weight of leather-bound books and strange texts written in Greek, Latin, and what might be the ink-splotched ramblings of a caffeine-starved monk. You select something soothing. The Life of St. Bridget. She tames wild dogs, breathes on bread to bless it, and once turned bath water into beer. You read slowly and with soft rhythm, watching as Sister Benedicta nods off by page 2. Success. A fringe detail that rarely gets discussed. Some nuns wrote their own marginalia. Notes, prayers, even private jokes scribbled in the borders of holy books. You've seen them. You've added some. In one volume you once found, "Lord forgive me, but Sister Clarice snores like a war trumpet." Eventually, your voice grows hoarse, and the sisters drift off like holy ducks in midday sun. You close the book gently and return it to the shelf, careful not to bump the hidden cookie you once tucked behind the book of Ezekiel. It's probably fossilized by now. You leave it, just in case. Walking back through the corridor, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the brass mirror near the scriptorium door. Your face is flushed, freckled, and mostly clean. You look tired, but there's something peaceful too. Maybe it's the scent of rosemary still clinging to your fingers. You wonder, what would your life have been if you hadn't come here? A wife? A washerwoman? A tailor's apprentice in a noisy, muddy town? Would you have had better shoes? Fewer prayers? You shake off the thought. It's almost time for sext. Another prayer hour, more chanting, more kneeling. Your knees are practically spiritual by now. But still, they ache. You stretch your back, crack your neck, and whisper to no one in particular, "All right, Lord, let's do this." You know that feeling when your stomach starts rehearsing lunch an hour early? That's what's happening now. The bell for sext rings across the abbey, and instead of thinking holy thoughts, you're mostly imagining lentils doing the conga line down your empty esophagus. Still, you shuffle into chapel like a good sister. The light slants golden through the high windows now, catching in the dust and making everything feel momentarily divine, or at least less damp. You kneel on the same worn patch of stone, chanting psalms that echo through your chest like a humming bowl. Afterwards, blessedly, it's mealtime again. Technically dinner, but let's not pretend it's anything exciting. You file back into the refectory and sit at the same spot, right next to Sister Joan, who has a habit of rearranging her lentils into the shape of the Virgin Mary. You respect the creativity. Today's meal is lentils, again, with a side of grayish bread and a hint of whatever the cook found clinging to the root cellar walls. The cook's name is Sister Clothilda. She's either a culinary minimalist or secretly waging war on flavor. Nobody asks. As always, a designated reader stands at the pulpit. This time, it's Brother Arnold from the neighboring monastery. He has a voice like a wheezing bagpipe and a talent for choosing the most gruesome martyr stories during meals. Nothing like hearing about St. Bartholomew's skinning while chewing cold turnips. You chew in silence. Forks don't exist yet, so you use a spoon and occasionally your fingers, discreetly, of course. The beer is watery, the bread is chewy, and someone is definitely kicking you under the table. It's either an accident or Sister Agnes asserting dominance. Either way, you don't flinch. That's how she wins. You try to focus on the story. St. Margaret was apparently swallowed by a dragon, then exploded out of its stomach by wielding the power of the cross. You glance at your spoon. Not quite the same, but you could probably ward off a small rodent with it. Historians still argue whether mealtime readings were chosen for their moral value or just to keep sisters from talking. Either way, they work. The room is filled with the sound of chewing and martyrdom. You begin to wonder if that counts as a kind of medieval ASMR. Toward the end of the meal, you notice Sister Cecilia has smuggled an extra bit of cheese onto her plate. Not blessed cheese, mind you, just ordinary cow cheese. You give her a look. She winks. Scandalous. After dinner, you help clear the tables. You're on dish duty now, which involves rinsing wooden bowls in cold water, scrubbing with sand, and praying that the clean one you pick tomorrow won't still smell like yesterday's cabbage. As you work, Sister Hildegard sidles up and mutters something about Sister Clothilda being under spiritual attack from culinary demons. You nod politely and keep scrubbing. With the dishes done, the sisters disperse to their assigned post-meal duties. Some go back to their needlework, some return to the library, and a few lucky ones take a brief rest before Vespers. You, however, are summoned to the chapter house. This is the Abbey's administrative core, a cold, echoing chamber with long benches and a polished wooden floor. Here, the abbess discusses decisions, reads out rules, and occasionally hands down punishments like extra sweeping or no second serving of lentils for a week. Brutal. You sit quietly as the abbess, Mother Ethelreda, who has the posture of a javelin, reads from the Rule of Saint Benedict. Today's theme? Silence. How fitting. She reminds you, in her most syrupy, threatening tone, that idle chatter weakens the soul. You nod solemnly, while inwardly recalling how Sister Scholastica whispered last week that the abbess once laughed at a fart during Compline. Just saying. The meeting ends with a round of confessions, not sins exactly, but public admissions. Sister Joan confesses to dozing during prayer. Sister Gertrude admits to losing the key to the cheese cupboard. You consider confessing that you made a face during yesterday's hymn, but think better of it. No need to start a scandal. As you file out, you overhear whispers about a noble visitor coming next week. The abbess might actually smile. You make a note to clean your shoes. Well, shoe. The left one still drying from yesterday's latrine spill. Back in your cell, you have a few moments to yourself. You sit on your narrow cot and look at the tiny sliver of sky through your window. A bird lands on the sill. You try not to get emotionally attached. Last time you named one, Sister Agnes caught you feeding it breadcrumbs and tattled. You take out your psalter and flip through the pages. You know them all by heart, but it helps to see the words. You run your finger over the tiny illuminated letters, tracing each gold leaf flourish. Someone, years ago, painted a tiny blue rabbit in the corner of Psalm 91. You wonder if she was as bored as you are right now. You close the book and lie back. Your stomach is quiet, your hands are sore, and your feet smell faintly of time. Tomorrow will be just like today, and the next day, and the next. And strangely, that's not so bad. At least you're not married to a pig farmer. It's late afternoon now, and while the outside world might be winding down with naps or gossip or a dangerously unregulated game of medieval stickball, you're making your way to confession. Again. You pass through the cloister, sandals flapping softly against the flagstones, and make a mental list of your recent sins. It's not a long list. Mostly, you've committed the usual. Pride. You did illuminate that G in Gloria a little too smugly. Envy. Sister Cecilia's veil lies perfectly flat. How does she do that? And gluttony. You may have licked the honey spoon last week. You step into the tiny confessional, which is really just a curtained alcove with suspiciously low ventilation and the lingering aroma of lavender and ancient guilt. Behind the screen, Father Lambert clears his throat dramatically. He does this every time, like he's about to sing opera. He never does, thankfully. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned, you begin, already regretting everything. You confess that you thought about complaining when Sister Agnes corrected your chant pitch, even though you were technically correct. You confess to feeding a mouse in the scriptorium. You confess to wondering, only wondering, what stable boys look like without veils. Father Lambert sighs through his nose. You wait. He recommends 3 extra prayers and less wandering of the imagination. He then asks, again, if you're experiencing any visions. You say no. You don't mention the dream about the talking owl quoting Ecclesiastes. It just doesn't feel like the right time. Historians still argue whether confession in convents was more spiritual release or a tool for control. In your case, it's mostly both. You feel lighter leaving the booth, but also like someone's keeping score. After confession, you return to the chapel for a short moment of reflection. A sunbeam falls through the window and lands squarely on your lap. You take it as a sign. Of what, you're not sure, but you decide to enjoy it until the next bell. That bell comes far too soon. It's time for a small break, and you use it to visit Sister Imelda in the infirmary. Not because you're sick, though your left eye has been twitching since Tuesday, but because she sometimes hides almonds in her apron. You find her crushing dried rose petals with a mortar and pestle, muttering about soothing tinctures and restless wombs. She greets you with her usual warm grunt and gestures for you to help. You start chopping dried ginger and whisper, "Any news?" She glances around and leans in. The abbess received a letter. A bishop is visiting next week. You raise your eyebrows. That explains the extra sweeping. And Sister Gertrude ironing her veil, which no one has done since 1327. While you work, Sister Imelda shares a recipe for easing night sweats that includes boiled carrot tops and a pinch of holy salt. You nod solemnly, even as you wonder if she's just making things up at this point. A fringe detail many forget. Nuns were often the only real healers in their area. The town women, though barred from entering, would sometimes leave notes or offerings near the abbey gate asking for herbal remedies. You've seen them, tied with twine, sometimes sealed with wax, always a little desperate. You've passed one or two to Sister Imelda, who pretends not to be flattered. You leave the infirmary with slightly sticky hands and a single almond tucked into your sleeve. Victory. As you pass the south wall, you see Sister Juliana drawing with a stick in the dirt. She's supposed to be collecting firewood, but instead she's sketching something. It's a face. Definitely not a saint's. Possibly a monk's. Possibly that monk. You cough pointedly. She jumps. You both share a look, then giggle. Carefully, quietly, like two schoolgirls pretending not to exist. You continue on, passing the laundry courtyard where linens flap like holy ghosts. You think about your own habit. Plain, heavy, mended 6 times at the elbow. You've had it for years. You wonder if Sister Clotilda will ever give in and let someone embroider just a little decorative border. Something tasteful. A vine. A lamb. A discreet mushroom. The Abbey rules forbid vanity. You know this. But still, Sister Cecilia does have nicer stitches around her collar. You suspect sabotage. As the sun dips lower, you help hang the last few sheets to dry. The wind picks up, and they snap like sails, momentarily turning the courtyard into a sea of flapping white. You pause, letting your mind drift again. What would it be like to sail away? To stand at the prow of a ship, free hair flying, no psalms in earshot? Then you sneeze. It breaks the spell. Time for vespers. You walk back toward the chapel, sandals now carrying a trace of mint leaves from the infirmary floor. Your stomach is starting to grumble again. It's not hunger exactly. It's just bracing itself for the spiritual fast that is evening prayer. You push open the heavy wooden chapel door and step once more into the familiar hush of candlelight and cold air. It's been a long day, and it's not over yet. By now, your body has fully surrendered to the rhythm of the Abbey bell. You no longer flinch when it tolls. You simply move, as if pulled by divine marionette strings. And right now, those strings are hauling you into vespers. Evening prayer, the golden hour of chants, the part of the day where the sun slants in at just the right angle to make the chapel look like the inside of a stained glass jewel box. If that jewel box smelled like incense and worn wool. You slide into your seat, back straight, veil adjusted, knees already protesting the coming hour. The chant begins low, a ripple of voices rising like steam in a bath. You add yours to the tide, your voice soft but steady, somewhere between devout servant of the Lord and soothing background ghost. The Psalms tonight are familiar. You hum the melody in your throat even before it's sung, like muscle memory. The flickering candles illuminate Sister Cecilia's profile perfectly, making her look like a medieval saint. You try not to feel competitive. You fail. Just as your mind starts to wander toward dreams of supper and whether there might be anything other than lentils, your ears prick up. A visitor is here. The chapel door creaks open. You're not supposed to look, but of course, everyone does. A cloaked figure enters, escorted by Sister Gertrude. It's a lay visitor, likely a noblewoman, and she's veiled so thoroughly that she resembles a sentient curtain. Visitors aren't unusual. People come seeking prayers, healing, or just a peek behind the mysterious monastic curtain. But every visit is like tossing a small pebble into the smooth pond of routine, and the ripples travel fast. After prayers end, you're assigned to help in the parlor, the designated meeting space for visitors. It's separated from the main abbey by a grill, an ornate wooden screen that allows conversation without direct contact, like holy customer service. You enter and sit on your side of the screen, folding your hands neatly in your lap. On the other side, the visitor adjusts her veil and leans forward. You can tell from her accent she's from the southern shires, and her perfume, roses and expensive judgment, hits your nose before her words do. She asks for prayers for her husband, who is going to war. You murmur your sympathy. She asks for blessings on her estate's crops. You nod solemnly. Then she asks the real question. Is it true the abbess saw a vision of the Virgin last winter? Ah, the real reason for the visit. You pause, carefully weighing your words. She spoke of a dream, you say evenly. Whether it was a vision is for the Lord to know. The noblewoman hums. And what did she see? You take a deep breath. This is not the time to mention that, according to Sister Scholastica, the vision may have been a side effect of undercooked turnips and 3 consecutive nights of no sleep. Instead, you say, she said, the Virgin appeared, radiant with light, and urged us to greater silence and service. The noblewoman replies. How poetic. She doesn't stay long. As she leaves, you hear her mutter something about the floors being drafty. You resist the urge to shout, "So is your theology," and instead bless her politely as she vanishes in a rustle of silk and piety. Back in the cloister, you catch Sister Beatrix whispering about the visitor's hat. Apparently, it was very last season. You chuckle under your breath. Even in the house of God, fashion drama lives on. Now comes the best part of the day. Free time. A whole 45 minutes of loosely supervised freedom before Compline. It's as wild as things get here. You retreat to your cell and pull out your small box of personal treasures. Nothing fancy, just a feather, a smooth pebble from the garden path, and a slip of parchment with an unfinished sketch of St. Francis riding a very bewildered donkey. You add to it a faint curl of a bird's wing, maybe a squirrel in a tiny halo. You know you'll erase it later, but for now, it's yours. Historians still argue whether nuns were permitted personal artistic expression in their downtime. Some accounts suggest tight restrictions. Others hint at flourishing creativity tucked into corners and margins. You believe the truth is somewhere in between, quiet rebellion in ink and gold leaf. Suddenly, you hear faint humming. Across the hall, Sister Juliana is at it again. She has a voice like a cracked flute, but bless her, she's fearless. She's humming a secular tune, a tavern song no less. You recognize it from your childhood. Something about a goose, a barrel of ale, and a boy named Thomas. It's wildly inappropriate. It's also the most delightful thing you've heard all day. You tiptoe to your door and knock twice. Your signal. She pauses, then resumes, just a little quieter. You both grin through the stone. As your free time winds down, you light your candle and glance at your psalter. You consider reading. You also consider napping. But the bell for Compline will come soon, and there's something sacred about this moment, this fragile, unsupervised hush. You close your eyes, just for a breath. The abbey is quiet now. Somewhere, a night bird calls. The smell of candle wax and lavender fills the air. You are exactly where you're meant to be. Well, assuming the cheese angel you doodled earlier doesn't get discovered. Compline begins with the kind of weary reverence that can only come from a day packed full of chanting, sweeping, weeding, and very controlled rebellious doodling. You arrive at the chapel just as the final rays of daylight bleed out through the west-facing stained glass. The Virgin Mary is glowing. So is your nose. You probably should have worn your heavier veil. You kneel once more, and the room settles into stillness. Only the rustle of habits and the occasional faint cough punctuate the silence. This is the last official prayer of the day, the final act before sleep, and if you play it right, before a brief moment of blessed internal monologue. The chant begins. Psalm 4, followed by the Nunc Dimittis, the ancient song of Simeon. You murmur the Latin automatically now. It curls softly through your throat, each syllable like a warm stone laid gently on your chest. Now let your servant depart in peace. You try not to snicker. You've definitely heard Sister Juliana whisper that line while dramatically flopping into bed. When Compline ends, the chapel darkens further. The final candle is snuffed. You bow, cross yourself, and exit with the others, single file, like sleepy penguins on a pilgrimage. You make your way back through the cloister halls, heading not for your bed yet, but for a quick, silent check of your assigned section of the Rule of St. Benedict. It's your week to study it, and tonight you're on Chapter 6, The Love of Silence. Oh, the irony. You sit in the library alcove, open the worn parchment, and trace your finger along the opening line. Let us do what the prophet says. I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. You sigh. The rule is unrelenting. You're reminded not to speak idly, to avoid laughter, to guard your words like precious relics. And yet, you remember Sister Beatrix bursting into a snort during last week's reading about celestial dung beetles in the lives of desert saints. She swore it was a sneeze. No one believed her. Historians still argue whether monastic silence was strictly enforced or more aspirational. Many abbeys had talking corners where small necessary words were exchanged. Some even developed an entire vocabulary of hand signs. You know 23 of them, including lentils again, you stepped on my hem, and pass the turnip. After your reading, you tuck the rule away and begin your slow walk back to your cell. The night air has cooled the halls, and your breath fogs slightly in the candlelight. You pass the courtyard and hear a faint rustle. You pause. Is it an owl? A ghost? Sister Cecilia raiding the herb shelf? No, just the wind, and maybe a mouse. You reach your door and push it open gently. Your cell welcomes you with familiar smells: wax, damp stone, and a hint of lavender from the sachet Sister Imelda gifted you after you accidentally fainted during a particularly long sermon. You sit at your tiny desk, light your stubby candle, and prepare to write your final journal line of the day. It's not technically allowed, but you keep a hidden scrapbook in a crack behind your bookshelf. Tonight's entry is short. Sister Juliana hummed the goose song again. I may die happy. You blow out the candle. Your room is now moonlit and full of sighs. You kneel for your private prayer. Not too long, not too short. Just the right length to keep your knees from mutinying. Then you slip into bed. Your straw-stuffed mattress groans under your weight. Your blanket is thin but familiar. You tuck your hands under your chin and close your eyes. Then, the bell rings again. You groan inwardly. Of course, it's the vigil bell, the signal for the night watch nun to rise for prayer. And tonight, it's your turn. You roll out of bed grab your candle, and shuffle into the hallway like a ghost with a schedule. The Abbey at night is a different world. The silence is heavier. Even the stones seem to sleep. You reach the chapel and light the small vigil lantern. Your voice cracks as you whisper the psalms alone. It feels different. Less like performance, more like actual prayer. You wonder if this is what it means to be truly quiet before God. A bat flutters near the rafters. The flame trembles. When you finish, you sit in the last pew and let the silence soak in. You're exhausted. You're cold. You're spiritually full and physically empty. And somehow, you're grateful. You return to bed just as the stars begin to fade behind early morning mist. You have exactly 3 hours to sleep before matins begins again. You nestle down, eyes already closing, and whisper the final verse of the Nunc Dimittis into your pillow. Now, Lord, you may let your servant go in peace, if only for a little while. Your eyes blink open just in time for the next bell. Again, because of course. The cycle doesn't stop, not for dreams, not for aching knees, and certainly not for the poor soul who fell asleep mid-psalm last week and got swatted by Sister Gertrude's prayer book. You dress quickly, hands fumbling with your veil in the near dark. You've had years of practice, but it still folds like it's got opinions. You manage to get everything in place and head down the hall, past the ancient crucifix that always creaks when the wind hits it just right. You suspect the wind isn't the only thing moving it. After matins and lauds, more chanting, more kneeling, more gentle sighs echoing through the chapel, you're finally given a less spiritual but equally sacred task: welcoming the morning visitors at the outer gate. A rare privilege, or a trap. Hard to say. You follow Sister Alda down the long passage that leads to the porter's parlor, a small chamber tucked near the front gate. It's separated from the outside world by a thick wooden grill, shaped like a medieval confessional meets the world's most severe room divider. The porter nun is the Abbey's contact with the world, a gatekeeper, a gossip sponge, a quiet force of diplomacy in linen robes. You sit beside Sister Alda, trying to look extra holy. She hands you the guest log, kept meticulously, with names, dates, and the occasional passive-aggressive side note. Lady Marjorie arrived late, again. Today's first visitor is a local woman, wearing a muddy cloak and holding a bundle of linen. She's left a note tied with twine, requesting prayers for her son, who was kicked by a horse. She also offers 2 turnips. You note it down, thank her in soft Latin, and accept the turnips like they're gold. Sister Alda, always composed, nods solemnly as if receiving the Magna Carta. You take the turnips to the kitchen, and then return in time for something more interesting. A nobleman's page boy arrives with a sealed letter. He's maybe 12, red-faced, trying very hard to look like he doesn't desperately need a snack. The letter is for the abbess. You don't read it, of course, but you do read the wax seal. It's from Baron de Chatelaine, whose family has opinions about convent funding, theology, and wine taxes. You wonder if it's a donation, a request, or a complaint. Probably all three. After he leaves, you and Sister Alda exchange a glance. Then she leans in and whispers, "Remember when his aunt visited and demanded a private tour? She thought the chapel smelled like boiled socks." You nod solemnly. It did smell like boiled socks that week. The incense had gone off. As the morning passes, you field requests for prayers, accept donations, a spool of rare blue thread, a jar of questionable pickled fish, and overhear a story about a monk who allegedly saw the Virgin in a wine stain. You're not saying that didn't happen, but you are saying the monk in question also once mistook a hedgehog for a demon. Historians still argue how much real power abbey porters wielded. Some were mere doorkeepers. Others, especially older nuns, were shrewd negotiators, record keepers, and quiet advisors to the abbess. You think Sister Alda might secretly run the entire place. At midday, the visitors taper off. You take a moment to sit in the sunlit archway near the gate. For a second, you glimpse the outside world, a winding dirt road, a field with sheep, and beyond it, the vague silhouette of the village. You haven't been there in years, maybe since you entered the convent. You wonder what the village baker's bread tastes like. Probably warmer, probably less like repentance. You hear footsteps. It's Sister Theophania, who is never without a needle and an opinion. She joins you under the arch and begins embroidering a new altar cloth. You try to look busy, so you start picking imaginary lint off your habit. "You know," she says without looking up, "Lady Cecily was once a nun, briefly, before she ran off with a falconer." You blink. What happened to her? Her falconer became a bishop. She became very bored. She pauses. "We pray for them both. Occasionally." You chuckle softly. It's the closest thing to gossip you're allowed, and it tastes delicious. As you stand to return to your duties, you spot a tiny offering left near the corner of the gate. A carved wooden bird, probably from a child. You pick it up gently and place it near the prayer candle stand inside. You don't know who left it, but you whisper a prayer anyway. That evening, when the gate is shut and the visitors are gone, you help Sister Alda write the final entries in the log. You sign your name with a flourish you definitely shouldn't have added, but it felt good, and you needed a win. You return to the cloister in time to see Sister Juliana get reprimanded for humming again. This time, it was a love ballad, in French. Bold. You grin. It's another day in the Abbey, where the doors stay closed, but the stories never stop coming. The bell tolls again, and it's time for another cherished Abbey tradition, pretending not to enjoy things you're definitely not supposed to be doing. You've just finished a modest supper, lentils, surprise, with a side of bread so crusty it may qualify as armor, and you're walking with the other sisters back to your cells when you hear it. A faint melody, drifting out from the direction of the storage loft. Someone's singing, not chanting, singing. You slow your pace and glance toward Sister Juliana, who's trying very hard to look innocent and failing spectacularly. Her lips twitch. That's all the confirmation you need. You sneak away during laundry sorting and slip up the narrow wooden stairs to the loft. It's a cramped, dusty space lined with grain sacks, pickling crocks, and at least one suspiciously squirrel-chewed hymnal. By candlelight, you find the source. Sister Juliana, sitting cross-legged on a crate, humming an old ballad under her breath. She jumps when she sees you, then relaxes when you don't tattle. Instead, you sit beside her, careful not to disturb the potato basket, and listen. The tune is familiar. Something about two lovers separated by war and reunited through sheer coincidence and a conveniently placed goose. Classic medieval love story. I found the notes in the margin of an old psalter, Juliana whispers. Someone must have written them years ago, maybe decades. She hands you the scrap, a musical scale scribbled in delicate ink, nestled beside Psalm 63. You hum a few bars and instantly regret it, because now you're both guilty. But it's worth it. You start quietly adding your own verses, changing the lyrics so they're technically about saints. Technically. You both giggle, careful to muffle the sound in your sleeves. This is the closest thing to rebellion in the Abbey. Secret music, sung to the mice and the grain sacks. Historians still debate how much music made it into convent life outside the prescribed chants. Officially, only sacred music was allowed. Unofficially, there are enough examples of secular melodies scribbled in the margins to suggest otherwise. You're now part of that tradition. But Juliana doesn't stop there. She pulls out a folded piece of parchment and unrolls it. It's covered in tiny sketches. Angels, mostly. But some of them look mischievous. One is definitely sticking out its tongue. Another is balancing a goblet on its halo. "Who drew these?" you whisper. She smirks. "Some of them were already there. I just added to the chaos." You scan the page. One corner shows a nun riding a donkey backwards. Another, a fox in a bishop's hat. It's delightful, irreverent, possibly heretical, certainly frowned upon. You borrow her charcoal stub and draw a snail jousting with a squirrel. You both nearly choke from holding in your laughter. That's when the floorboard creaks. You freeze. Juliana grabs the parchment and stuffs it under her robe faster than a squirrel hoarding nuts before winter. The creak passes. Just the wind? A ghost? Sister Agnes doing her nightly judgment patrol? You don't wait to find out. You both tiptoe down the loft stairs and slip out separately, back to your cells, hearts pounding like you've just outrun the Inquisition. Back in your room, you light your candle and sit at your little desk. You pull out your own hidden stash, scraps of parchment, barely legible notes, a miniature ink drawing of St. Cuthbert standing in a puddle with a goose. You add tonight's sketch. Angel playing a lute with a fish. Subtle, edifying, probably legal. You wonder, do the others know? The abbess certainly wasn't born yesterday. Maybe she turns a blind eye. Or maybe she used to sketch squirrels in the margins, too. You lie in bed and think about how the world outside imagines nuns. Serious, solemn, perfect. But in here, tucked behind veils and rule books, are dozens of tiny rebellions. Secret songs, silent laughter, invisible squirrels in golden borders. Maybe holiness isn't silence. Maybe it's joy, just whispered quietly enough not to wake Sister Gertrude. You're halfway through a rather satisfying dream about freshly baked honey bread when the bell clangs. Again. But this one is different. It's urgent. It's not the gentle, mournful toll of matins or the dull drone of labor bells. No, this one has a sharpness to it, like a spoon dropped in a chapel full of guilt. You sit bolt upright. Outside your cell, the hallway is a stir of whispering veils and scuttling sandals. Someone lit a torch. That only happens when something serious has occurred, or when Sister Clothilda tries to find her teeth in the dark again. Then you hear the phrase that strikes fear into even the holiest of hearts. The abbess is on the warpath. Oh no. You grab your veil, straighten your posture, and join the others in the scriptorium where the epicenter of this mystery apparently lies. There it is, spread out across the central desk like a crime scene. A manuscript. The manuscript. The Abbey's prized copy of the Gospels, hand-illuminated by a now-deceased sister known for her microscopic golden flourishes and extremely judgy seraphim. And now, someone has spilled ink on the bottom corner of St. Luke. Deep blue ink. There's a hush in the room. A few sisters glance subtly toward Sister Juliana. Others, more treacherous, glance at you. The abbess enters. Mother Ethelreda, tall as judgment and twice as silent. Her face is unreadable. Her shoes are terrifying. Her hands are folded like they're hiding a lightning bolt. Who, she asks softly, dangerously, was working in the scriptorium after sext yesterday? You clear your throat. I was, Reverend Mother. The silence shifts. Someone gasps. Probably Sister Agnes. She lives for gasps. Alone? The abbess asks. You glance at Juliana. She does not blink. Her poker face is flawless. Yes, you lie, boldly, quietly, sacrilegiously. She steps closer, inspects your hands. The ink stain from yesterday is gone. You scrubbed thoroughly. Your soul, however, has developed a permanent smudge. She studies you for a moment longer, then sighs. Accidents happen, she says at last. But we must be careful. God sees all. You nod furiously, trying not to look like you're remembering the squirrel joust sketch from last night. The abbess glides out, and the tension shatters like stale communion wafers. Juliana squeezes your arm. I owe you honey bread for life. You owe me a new habit if I get excommunicated, you whisper. Historians still argue how strict abbesses were in day-to-day discipline. Some were terrifying disciplinarians. Others were maternal. A few were ambitious power players who ran abbeys like minor kingdoms. Mother Ethelreda, somewhere between Mother Superior and Benevolent Dragon. Later that afternoon, you're assigned to clean the sacristy, possibly as punishment, possibly by chance, possibly because Sister Gertrude overheard you humming. You won't ask. The sacristy is small and cold, lined with chalices, linens, and things you're technically not qualified to touch. You dust everything anyway. The gold candelabra flickers in the afternoon light, and you catch your reflection in its polished curve. You look tired. You also look suspiciously like someone who just lied to the abbess. You mutter a quiet apology to St. Luke and promise to illuminate your next psalm copy with extra flourishes. It's the least you can do. While dusting the reliquary shelf, you spot a small silver box labeled Tooth of St. Eadwig. You open it. It's empty. You glance around. No one's watching. You close it and pretend you never looked. Back in the cloister corridor, Sister Imelda corners you with a basket of herbs and a deeply suspicious look. Your aura's twitching, she mutters. What did you do? You smile sweetly. Nothing worth writing down. She squints. As the day winds down, you finally slip away to the chapel and kneel in your usual spot. You light a small taper and whisper a short, honest prayer. Forgive me, Lord, for the lie and for enjoying it a little too much. There's no lightning, no thunder, just candlelight and the faint sound of someone sneezing in the distance. Probably Sister Cecilia. She has strong opinions about dust. You exit into the courtyard just in time to catch the last sliver of sun dipping behind the abbey wall. For a moment, it turns the garden gold. A hawk circles overhead. You wonder if it's watching, judging, blessing, or just hungry. You whisper, "Don't tell St. Luke." Then you return to your cell, heart still pounding, fingers still ink-stained in spirit, and somehow feeling more alive than you have in weeks. The next morning begins, unsurprisingly, with another bell. At this point, you no longer startle. You simply awaken, like a medieval tulip, stiff, cold, and slightly resentful of God's scheduling. Today, however, brings a break in the endless tide of copying and scrubbing. You've been assigned to refectory preparation, which in theory is a simple task. In practice, it means preparing the room for meals, cleaning every bench, sweeping out the breadcrumbs of 1,000 Lents, and ensuring that the candle stubs are replaced so Sister Hildegard doesn't set her sleeve on fire again. That was dramatic and kind of entertaining. As you enter the refectory, the morning sun slices across the dusty air, illuminating every floating mote like a miniature procession of ghostly saints. You pause, enjoying the quiet before the work begins. You sweep, scrub, straighten. You test the benches for wobble. You align the bread bowls like a holy Tetris game. Sister Gertrude passes by, nodding approvingly. She rarely speaks, just inspects. You suspect her inner monologue is a never-ending chant of punctuated by judgments about cleanliness and posture. While you work, your thoughts drift, not just to the psalm you'll likely have to copy later, or what Sister Cecilia will inevitably say about your sweeping technique, but to something more dangerous. Life outside the walls. You think of your brother's last letter, sent months ago. It was short. He's fine. The harvest was decent. The cow died. His handwriting is worse than a blind hedgehog in a windstorm. But the point came through. The world continues without you. You don't regret being here. Not really. But you wonder what it would be like to make decisions without bells, to sleep in, to wear shoes not made of bark. You once heard a tale about a nun who faked visions of the Virgin so she'd be allowed to visit a nearby monastery library. She allegedly saw the Virgin Mary every time a new book arrived. Convenient. Historians still argue whether these visions were genuine religious experiences or desperate cries for intellectual stimulation. You lean toward the latter. You've met the librarian. He owns 2 books on Roman irrigation. You'd fake a vision, too. You pause your sweeping and take a moment to gaze out the high window. The fields beyond are green now, dotted with early spring flowers. A few birds flutter past. One smacks into the glass and recovers with admirable dignity. Sister Juliana enters carrying a basket of spoons and wearing an expression of mild existential dread. "I dreamed last night that I was a turnip," she whispers as she sets the utensils down. You nod sympathetically. Was it peaceful? Only until someone tried to pickle me. You both go quiet as Sister Clothilda walks past with a scowl that could curdle milk. Juliana resumes sorting spoons. You resume sweeping. The work is dull, predictable, comforting, until the candle shelf collapses. It's not a loud crash, but it is a crash. A slow-motion disaster of half-melted stubs, old wax discs, and a small dusty statuette of Saint Germain that you didn't even know was on the shelf. She lands face down. You both freeze. Juliana mutters, "Saint Germain, forgive us." You add, "Also, maybe help us find some glue." You clean up quickly. No one saw. Probably. The rest of the morning passes in similar fashion. Small tasks, whispered confessions, and a growing suspicion that Sister Agnes has hidden the good broom again. Later, while fetching more candles from the storeroom, you find something unexpected. A bundle of old letters tied with blue string and tucked behind a loose brick. You look around. The room is empty. You untie the string with reverence usually reserved for relics. They're love letters, very old, very dramatic, filled with flowery Latin, flowery metaphors, and enough angst to power a monastery's worth of unrequited longing. You skim a few lines. My dearest in God, though we are bound by vows, I find my soul wanders ever toward your shadow in the west transept. You blink. You reread. You realize the writer is very much a nun. So is the recipient. You stare at the stack, heart thudding. You're not shocked. Nuns are humans after all. But you are amazed at the elegance, the wit, the delicate inkwork. There's even a tiny pressed violet in one. You don't take them. You rewrap them and return them to their hiding place. But you whisper a soft thanks into the empty air for beauty, for longing, for secret ink-stained hearts. You return to your duties with a strange lightness in your chest. The world inside the abbey may be small, but it contains multitudes. It's deep into the evening now. The last rays of sun are gone. The chapel is lit only by flickering candles, and the abbey has taken on that strange, humming stillness that makes you question whether everyone's quietly asleep or secretly planning something involving leeches. You're up again, not because of bells this time, but because of a persistent cough and the equally persistent stare of Sister Imelda, who has finally declared you unbalanced in the humors. You disagreed. Then you coughed on her embroidery, and she marched you straight to the infirmary. You're now lying on a low pallet in the corner, wrapped in a scratchy blanket that smells like thyme, vinegar, and something suspiciously like boiled cabbage. Sister Imelda is bustling around her table of jars and herbs like a medieval apothecary with a personal vendetta against comfort. She approaches with a jar of leeches. You sit bolt upright. I don't think it's that serious, you protest. She raises an eyebrow. Do you feel spiritually and physically aligned? You hesitate. My ears are very warm. Leeches it is. Historians still debate the medical value of leeching. You, in this moment, are firmly on the side of dubious at best. But you submit, because resistance means a longer lecture about imbalance of humors and spleen vapors. She places 2 leeches gently on your forearm and mutters a prayer. You lie very still, staring at the ceiling beams and pretending you are anywhere else, like perhaps a windswept cliffside where the only thing sucking your blood is metaphorical. Meanwhile, Sister Imelda brews you a soothing tonic. You know better than to ask what's in it. It smells like someone tried to make soup from old socks and a pine cone. You drink it anyway. It's warm, at least. Comforting, in the same way an exorcism might be. You lie back, slightly dizzy, and stare at the infirmary's shelves, lined with jars labeled St. John's wort, ground snail, and something ominously called Pilgrim's Regret. You try not to think about it. Then it happens. Somewhere between the fourth cough and the second leech burp, yes, you're almost certain you heard it. You see something. A figure. Not Sister Imelda. Not a nun. It's standing in the corner, faint, glowing faintly blue, like moonlight filtered through memory. It's a woman. Her face is peaceful, serene, and terrifying in the soft way that makes your throat close slightly. You blink. She's still there. She raises a hand, slowly, and points toward the chapel. Then she's gone. You sit up. The leeches fall off, offended. You whisper, "Did you see that?" Sister Imelda glances up. See what? You're not sure what to say. You're not even sure you want to know what just happened. Later, back in your cell, you sit cross-legged on your cot, a blanket draped over your shoulders, and try to make sense of it. Was it a vision? A hallucination? The tonic? You write in your hidden journal, "A woman in blue." She pointed to the chapel. Peaceful, not frightening. Not sure what it means. Not feverish. Not yet. Historians still argue about nun visions. Some were carefully recorded. Others were quietly ignored. A few turned entire abbeys into pilgrimage sites. And some were just the product of overworked minds, overboiled herbs, and a sprinkle of divine suggestion. You crawl under your blanket, staring at the ceiling. You could tell the abbess, but she might decide it's a sign, or a sin, or both. Or you might get assigned to extra fasting, which you suspect would involve even more lentils. You decide for now to wait. If it was truly something divine, it will come back. Or maybe it was Saint Germain, angry about the candle shelf incident. Either way, you pray quietly into your pillow, not with fear, but with curiosity. You end your prayer the way you always do. Guide me, Lord, but maybe skip the leeches next time. The abbey sleeps. The stars wheel overhead. Somewhere a night bird calls. And you, half sick, half awake, lie in the dark and wonder if the holy life is really meant to be this strange. You wake up slowly, wrapped in the kind of warmth that only comes from fever, heavy blankets, and a vague suspicion that someone's been watching you sleep. You're still in your cell. The morning bell hasn't rung yet, but you can hear movement outside. Soft footsteps, the rustle of linen, the groan of Sister Beatrix's knees, a known source of complaint and minor miracle. You sit up, lightheaded. The tonic hangover is real. Everything smells slightly of fennel and boiled vinegar. You glance down. No leeches this time. A win. As you shuffle out into the hallway, you're greeted by an unexpected hush. Not just the usual monastic silence, but a kind of alert quiet. A room holding its breath kind of quiet. Something has happened. Sister Hildegard pulls you aside by the sleeve and whispers, "There's word from the bishop. He's coming early." You blink. Today, today. You're not ready. The Abbey's not ready. The garden still smells like manure. Sister Gertrude's eyebrows are uneven. This is not the energy of an abbey that's ready for inspection. You're quickly assigned to help with preparation, which today means rearranging the library, polishing the chalice, and, inexplicably, convincing the resident cat to not nap on the altar cloth. You fail. The bishop's arrival is, in a word, dramatic. He shows up on a horse that looks far too noble for this particular patch of countryside, flanked by a young scribe who looks terrified and a monk who looks bored. He's announced with 3 firm knocks on the abbey gate and a rather unconvincing trumpet toot from the scribe. Sister Alda, as porter, greets him with a nod so slow it may qualify as glacial diplomacy. You, naturally, are hiding behind a door, watching through a crack like a proper medieval wallflower. You can see the bishop's robes, deep purple, embroidered with gold. His face is flushed, probably from the ride or from divine fervor. Hard to say. He enters the abbey like he owns it. The sisters line up, heads bowed. The abbess greets him with her most careful smile, warm enough to be devout, distant enough to remain powerful. The bishop announces he wishes to speak with the sisters, especially those tasked with scriptural copying, prayer leadership, and vision reports. Your stomach drops. It's the vision, the one you haven't told anyone about. Later that afternoon, you're summoned, along with 3 other sisters, to the chapter house, where the bishop sits in a carved chair that looks like it's judging you harder than he is. He asks questions about routine, about discipline, about prayer schedules. You answer politely, calmly, until, have any of you had unusual experiences this week? He says it casually, but his eyes are sharp. You freeze. Sister Scholastica clears her throat and mumbles something about seeing a halo around the moon. You stay quiet. Then he turns to you directly. And you, sister? Your heartbeat kicks up like a donkey in a sermon. You could lie. You've done it before. St. Luke says hi. Or you take a breath. I saw a woman in blue. She pointed toward the chapel. The bishop leans forward. And what do you think it meant? You don't say, I think I had a vision because I was sweating out herbal soup and grief over spilt ink. Instead, you say, I think we are meant to listen more, even in silence. There's a pause, a long one. He nods slowly. Wise. The Lord whispers. The world is loud. He doesn't press further. You're dismissed. But not before he adds, continue your prayers and listen well. You float out of the chapter house, heart still hammering, unsure whether you just passed a test or accidentally founded a new feast day. Historians still debate how seriously visions were taken in nunneries. Some led to sainthood, others to exorcism. Most were quietly filed away, respected, but not dwelled upon. You return to your cell and sit quietly. No candle, no parchment, just stillness. The Abbey feels different now, not because anything changed, but because you did. You were honest. You were brave. You didn't mention the squirrel sketch. That night, you light a single candle and whisper the Psalms to yourself, slowly, carefully, as though the woman in blue might be listening. And maybe she is. The bishop leaves in the early morning. No trumpets this time. Just the gentle sound of hooves on frost-hardened soil and the faint creak of his saddle fading down the road. You watch from an upper window with Sister Juliana, both of you wrapped in borrowed cloaks and mild paranoia. "Well," she mutters, "no one got excommunicated." "Yet," you reply, sipping weak tea and trying not to think about divine audits. The Abbey returns to its regular rhythm almost immediately, like a wound-up clockwork doll snapping back into step. But beneath the surface, something's changed. You feel it in the way the sisters nod to you with a touch more respect, in the quiet curiosity of Sister Imelda's glance when she passes you in the garden, and in the way the abbess now occasionally pauses mid-chore to ask, "And how are you, sister?" You start to wonder if your little midnight vision has made you a spiritual celebrity. You hope not. You didn't ask for any of this. You just wanted warm bread and maybe to draw one more angel doing something ridiculous in the margin of Psalm 82. Still, it lingers, this quiet new weight on your shoulders. You keep praying, keep copying, keep sketching tiny nuns riding fish in your hidden notebook. But now, people expect something of you. One morning, the abbess assigns you to lead lauds. You almost choke on your barley tea. "Me?" She nods. "Yes, I trust you." It's terrifying and kind of thrilling. You practice alone in the chapel after dark, whispering the lines over and over until the words flow like soft wind through glass. The next day, you do it. Your voice wavers at first, but by the third verse, it steadies. The chapel echoes back your own sound, as if gently agreeing with your existence. Later, Sister Gertrude actually smiles at you. You consider writing that down in your journal. It may never happen again. As spring deepens, the Abbey bursts into color. The cloister garden fills with tulips and wild herbs. The bees return, as arrogant as ever. The sparrows hop across the paving stones like they own the place. You start taking long walks in the cloister during your free time, feeling the sun on your face, noticing the small, ordinary miracles. A new bloom on the fig tree, the smell of rosemary in the warm air, the way Sister Beatrix's sneezes come in predictable threes. You pass the chapel one day and pause at the door. And there she is, the woman in blue. No glowing aura this time. No dramatic gestures. just a calm presence. She doesn't speak. She doesn't point. She just smiles. And then she's gone. Not vanished. Just no longer needed. You stand very still. Your heartbeat slows. You feel an enormous quiet inside you, like a bell that's finished ringing. You realize, finally, that her message was never about grandeur or miracles or sainthood. It was simply, pay attention to the prayers, to the garden, to the laughter muffled in sleeves, to the holiness hidden in lentils and ink. You return to your cell that night and write one last note in your hidden journal. She smiled. And you know what? You smile too. And now, as the bells fall silent and the last candle flickers its final glow against the stone walls, the abbey settles once more into its deep, rhythmic breath. You lie in your little cell, beneath a blanket still faintly scented with lavender and dust, the cool air wrapping around you like a whispered hymn. Outside, the cloister is bathed in moonlight, silver and still, and the fig tree rustles softly as a breeze stirs its ancient limbs. Somewhere, a sparrow shifts in its nest. A cat pads silently across the courtyard, and the stars, so far above the abbey's stone walls, blink gently on and off, like celestial nuns keeping their own strange watch. You've lived this day many times now, 1,000 small repetitions, 100 whispered prayers, one woman in blue, and as your breathing slows and your muscles soften, you understand that this life, quiet, hidden, ordinary, is also a kind of miracle. A secret music hummed softly into the corners of the world. Not every story ends with glory or fire. Some end with silence, with steadiness, with a smile passed through candlelight. So close your eyes now. Let the chapel drift away. Let the ink dry. Let the bells ring only in your dreams. You are safe here. You are seen. And for tonight, you are exactly where you're meant to be.